Chapter 12. P&G equals OMG. Procter & Gamble Co. Headquarters. Late evening. Head of Research and Development, Frank Beagley, is sitting in his laboratory, hunched at his desk, finishing an experiment. A rotund, middle-aged man, he breathes heavy, his position putting too much pressure on his lungs. The lab is open plan and lengthy with many workstations and desks, and various kinds of equipment and technology. In one area there are row upon row of cages containing many different species of animal, from dogs and cats, to monkeys and mice, to rabbits and rats. The overhead lighting above Beagley's workstation is on, but the rest of the laboratory is shrouded in darkness.
Good night, Mr. Beagley,
A colleague says, as she hurriedly leaves and enters the elevator. Beagley is too engrossed in his experiment. The doors are already closing before he notices and acknowledges her.
Huh?
He says, looking up from a squealing rabbit, which is secured tightly in a restraining apparatus with clamps. He is gingerly attempting to inject a peculiar-looking substance from a syringe into the creature's eye. The elevator doors close.
Yes, good night,
He says, nonchalantly, raising his thin grey eyebrows which match his thinning grey side parting. A sudden squeal from the rabbit pulls Beagley's attention back. He has inadvertently stabbed the needle deep into the twitching creature's eye socket and into its brain.
God damn it!
He yells, as the animal goes limp and lifeless.
2 hours of my life wasted. Thanks, you stupid bitch.
He calls out, in the direction of the elevator. He angrily thrusts himself up and out of his seat.
I'll have her job. Who was that?
He realises that he hadn't looked up in time to identify her, and this frustrates him further.
Maybe I'll have Joe look over the CCTV footage.
He suggests to himself. He struts down the length of the laboratory, his unfastened lab coat flapping behind him, through double doors and out into a corridor. He makes his way to a small office at the far end of the corridor. There is a small note pinned on the door which reads, "CCTV system down. Gone to the main control terminal to reset the computer." Beagley tuts and looks through the office window. The CCTV monitors display only static.
The main control terminal? That's in the sub-level.
He briefly thinks about heading down there. After some consideration, he decides to just huff and make his way back to his desk instead. He re-enters the lab. It is deserted, save for frightened, restless animals, cowering in cramped stainless steel cages and audibly suffering.
I'll start again in the morning.
He concedes, reaching his desk. He slumps back down in his seat, unfastens the top button on his pink pastel shirt, and picks up a mug. He takes a sip of cold coffee as he stares at the dead animal in front of him. Its petrified dead eyes staring right back at him. An electrical pulse ripples down his spine, unnerving him.
Must be the coffee.
He tells himself. Beagley yawns. He looks up at a clock on the wall. It's 21:30 hours.
Time to head home. To the wife.
He skills. He looks back at the dead rabbit.
Consider yourself lucky.
He says, pointing at it. He begins to chuckle. His amusement is interrupted by a loud smashing noise, somewhere behind him in the lab. Beagley jumps out of his chair again.
Damn macaques have gotten loose again.
He carefully walks towards the direction of the sound and eventually discovers an apparatus of beakers and test tubes lying smashed on the ground.
Little bastards.
He grumbles. He bends down to pick up a beaker that has remained intact, and as he straightens up again, he feels a powerful blow to the back of his head. Pain overwhelms his senses. Brilliant bright colours flash in front of his eyes, and as his legs give way under him and it all fades to grey, he starts to fall. The grey fades to black as he hits the floor, unconscious. A short time later, Beagley slowly wakes up with a long groan. He has the mother of all headaches. He opens his eyes. At first he thinks he is blind. He panics, but he realises it is simply dark wherever he is. He seems to be sitting down. He tries to move, but his head and his body ache. His head, due to the blow, and his body, due to sitting in one position, for however long he has been unconscious. He tries to move again, and can't, and panics again, thinking he is paralysed. But then he realises that he is tied, cable-tied and duct-taped to his chair. His head is tightly held back in position, with one of his own restraining clamps. He tries to call for help, but can't. His mouth is tape closed. Now he truly panics. He struggles and groans and breathes heavily through his nostrils until he is exhausted. He is trapped. His wide, bloodshot eyes dart, scanning the darkness. He tries to call out again, but the pain from his head washes over him again, and he struggles to stay conscious, blinking rapidly. An overhead light flickers on directly above him, creating a spotlight effect.
Ah, Frankie. Welcome back.
Comes a man's gruff voice. Beagley freezes, holding his breath. A shadowy figure slowly begins to approach Beagley from out of the darkness into the light and proceeds to straddle him in his seat.
Why, you look terrified, Frankie.
Beagley's breath is shallow and erratic as he stares up at his antagonist.
Frank Beagley, head of research and development. I find it too ironic, too cynical to bear, that a man has a surname that sounds like the very species of dog he tortures to death on a daily basis.
The man leans in closer to Beagley's face.
Do you know why vivisectionists and animal torturers like you use that particular species of dog? Frankie, the beagle?
Beagley knows why. His eyes answer the question.
Of course you do. It's because they are docile and obedient and trusting.
The man lowers his head and his body shudders as if he is in pain.
You use their gentle, trusting nature against them in the most hideous and merciless ways, don't you, Frankie?
Beagley tries to protest, to plead. He frantically mumbles something incoherent. His captor just raises a finger to the tape where Beagley's lips would be.
Shh. This isn't a court case where you try to justify or mitigate your actions. This, Frankie, is an execution.
Beagley fears for his life and begins to squirm in his seat, trying to shout for someone, anyone, to rescue him from this nightmare. But of course, no one does, or will. He begins to sob.
Did you think your crimes would go unpunished? Did you think your swarm of lawyers, the police, your hired thugs, could protect you from your judgment?
Beagley sobs and tries to plead for his life with his eyes.
There is no judgment for people like you. No forgiveness. No rehabilitation. Psychopaths like you don't have the ability, the mechanism for compassion, to see the error of your destructive ways. And some can see their errors, some know their transgressions, and just don't care.
The man says, raising a test tube with a clear faint yellow viscous liquid inside.
And me? Well, I'm just a different kind of psychopath altogether.
He smiles. The man pauses and seems to be in deep thought for a moment.
You see, after all these years of dealing with people like you and your god-awful industries, I find the best solution is fight fire with fire.
The man holds the test tube above Beagley's right eye.
Or another way of putting it, an eye for an eye.
Beagley begins to moan and sob, and his frightened, desperate eyes try to beg for mercy. It causes the man to pause.
You know, you look exactly like the millions of animals that are tortured and destroyed every day. Scared and defenseless, fearing death, or worse. When they find your body, the world will understand this message, Frankie. I can be the one to set you free from it all. This life you have built for yourself, a life of torture and cruelty and pseudoscience. I can give you the retribution you will never know. I can bring some meaning to the needless death that you and your corporation inflict on nature in this world. Do you not see, Frankie? I am your redeemer.
There is a silent lull. Beagley holds his breath.
Now, from reading your public relations literature regarding your toxicity tests on animals, this should only be mildly irritating.
He pours some of the liquid into Beagley's open eye. Beagley immediately screams from behind the tape and writhes in his seat as his eye begins to sizzle and bubble and burn. Combined with the pain from his head wound, he briefly fades in and out of consciousness.
I would hardly call that mild irritation.
The man laughs, reading the side of the test tube.
Says here, concentrated and dilute before use. Whoopsie.
Beagley's eye slowly dissolves away as his attacker moves the test tube over his other eye and tips some liquid out. Beagley closes his eyelid in an attempt to protect himself, but the liquid burns his eyelid away, just in time to see more liquid falling down onto his exposed eye. He screams again and contorts in his seat as both his eyes burn and sizzle, and a dirty black smoke rises up from the gloopy pulp. His assailant leans in and takes a deep breath through his flaring nostrils, inhaling the foul fumes.
Gravy.
As the liquid works its way into Beagley's skull and starts dissolving his grey matter, he is barely aware of his killer getting off him, placing a small white card on his chest, taking a photograph, and then swiftly leaving. As Beagley's mind slips into the final stages of death, and his brain is flooded with sedating, dream-inducing chemicals, he can't help but realise that when he is found in the morning, he will look exactly like the dead rabbit he was laughing at earlier, bound and tortured and dead. But now, all that doesn't seem to matter anymore. Nothing does. Not even the fact that there is no tunnel, no light, no angels or deceased relatives to greet him. Just a fading sense of regret, and then blackness, as he finally dies.